Thank you guys for showing up and being here. I have a lot of energy right now, so I'm going to try to tame the beast just a little bit and match the vibration. But every now and then, you have 5 cups of coffee and you're ready to rock. I did not add 2.
Morning meditation.
And all the things. Cool. Who here feels like they have a good grasp of biotensegrity? A few of us. Sweet. Well, I hope to, at the very least, get the rest of you started in starting to study this work, because when it comes to analysis and really just philosophy of life, understanding tensegrity structures is fundamental, and I think it's a principle at this point. I would say, unfortunately, I believe we're teaching anatomy wrong at chiropractic schools. And it's interesting with the new research that's coming out and with the new levels of understanding that we still teach old physics in anatomy. And I say old, and I mean it's actually antiquated, right? That we're still learning lever systems. Is that not correct? Am I wrong? We're still learning lever systems. And the body does not work in a lever system. Okay, so I want to first give you guys some resources, just so you know, and I'm going to say some things that might challenge your current beliefs, and there's also going to be times to ask questions. Okay, so for resources, Thomas Myers' Anatomy Trains, to me, is a must. It's a must because it's going to start to lay down a great foundation of, one, understanding that muscles do not work in isolation, right? We learn them in isolation, right? We learn origin insertion and what's the nerve root that supplies it and all of these things that you have to learn, and what is the motion of that muscle that the motion generates. But even the word anatomy, just so you know, means to cut away. So when we're studying anatomy and we study individual biceps brachii, that muscle has been cut away from the fascia that surrounds it so that you could actually even see it as an individual muscle. So again, as you go into the cadaver labs and you actually start to look before things have been cut away, you realize, ooh, there's this juicy connective tissue here. And it's interesting because I used to think that connective tissue did nothing, right? It was just this stuff that was surrounding it, and we need to get rid of it so we can actually see where the goods are at, right? Because the goods are in the muscles. But before you cut away all that fascia or connective tissue, what you would establish, and what Thomas Myers does so beautifully in Anatomy Trains, is that there is chains of muscles in the body. For those of you that have been training foundation training, or that are familiar with some of the ninjas, Kairos training culture work, we really work that posterior chain, right? There's a chain of muscles that start from the bottom of your heel, and there's a continuous network that goes up the calf, up the hamstring, up the back, and really all the way up through the occiput, right? And so that chain of muscles you could call the posterior chain, but you also have an anterior chain, you also have a transverse chain, and you also have spiral chains that go throughout the body. Now, the importance of that is that once you start to understand that there are global chains of muscles, you start to realize that, again, muscles don't move in isolation. You cannot fire a bicep without firing something else. And part of that, we also learned that there's also an antagonist that needs to happen, right, to avoid injury and maximal contraction, where it just pulls off. A tendon will just pull off the humerus or pull off the other insertion site. But another piece of understanding why this is important is muscles attached to bone, right? And so do the ligaments, and so do the connective tissue. And so really, there's not any motion in your body that can happen that doesn't affect not just what's next to it, but the whole. And so the first level of understanding, let's actually drop in also on the connective tissue part. The connective tissue does not just do nothing. If you read the book Fascia by Robert Schleip, it's a textbook on fascia. And also, I'm going to actually lay out your resources. Robert Schleip, I think it's Schleip, I believe it is, has a textbook on fascia. Thomas Myers has Anatomy Trains, and he also has Structural Release, I believe is the book, which again, it's kind of like a myofascial release book, but there's tons of knowledge there, even if you don't, I don't do myofascial release work, but I learned a shit ton about fascia and biotensegrity from reading that book. There's Biotensegrity by Graham Scarr. And then there's a group of Italians that actually have two amazing books. I'm trying to think of the name of them again. What's the book's called? It's been a minute. It's actually a picture guide to fascial anatomy. I'll get the name for you guys. Stecco, Stecco. They have two books out, and they're just extremely detailed. One is more of a practical approach, and then one is just like a full pictured anatomy. What do you call it? An atlas of fascia. So, those are your resources. We realize that everything is connected to everything, and let's talk about how biotensegrity, so bio meaning body, or relating to biology. Tensegrity is a word that was actually created by Buckminster Fuller, meaning tension integrity. Buckminster Fuller was an amazing philosopher and architect, created the geodesic dome, but then also went on to create tensegrity structures. One thing you'll notice about tensegrity structures, and I'm sorry I didn't bring a model, is that they have two main components. They have compression struts, or like the hard components, and then they also have the tensile bands, which again, if you relate that immediately to the human body, bones would be the compression struts, and then your muscles and ligaments would be those bands, the tension structures. Tension is pulling things away. Compression is pushing things in. And what you'll find is in a tensegrity structure that the actual compression struts are not touching one another, and that it's omnidirectional. That's another component of being a tensegrity structure, meaning that a lot of the way that we look at things, even like as a building, that if you were to flip that over on its side or flip it over on its head, it wouldn't work very well, would it? But a tensegrity structure can actually still function in or in multiple directions, so omnidirectional. So what the hell does all that mean to us as chiropractors? One is that when performing analysis, you can realize that when you see something in an ankle, or you see something in a knee, or you see something in a hip, or an atlas, or even a cranial bone, that will cause a whole cascade of events in the rest of the body. And that, this is where people start to get a little on edge. That although you may see something on x-ray, right, that looks like misalignment, that may not be the area that you want to go and adjust. Now, there is another component to subluxation, and this has always been communicated, that a subluxation is not just misalignment, it's also what? Affects the neurology, right? That a subluxation has to cause interference to the communication of the impulse, right? Or interference to the mental impulse, or you could say interference within the nerve system. So having just a misalignment does not make it a subluxation. Now, with that said, there are a lot of techniques that will then use a system where they find such and such misalignment according to film, and then based on whatever other measures, now sometimes it's leg check, sometimes it's infrared thermography, and sometimes it's a mix of other functional parameters, then decide that they're going to adjust or not adjust. What I have found is that although such and such misalignment may be that big convexity where things are sticking out, that it can have multiple entry points. Pause. Meaning that although you find C1 ASRP atlas, doesn't mean that a C1 ASRP adjustment is always going to be what's necessary for that person, right? Even when you're picking up neurological interference. That I may have rotated shoulder, looks like an AI shoulder, but do I have an AI shoulder? Again, if you actually look at the osteokinematics of my shoulder, it is misplaced in that way, right? But is that due to AS ilium? Is that due to a rotated lumbar? Is that due to a T3 subluxation? It could be any of that, right? And more. And so the bigness becomes not where do I always find the high shoulder or the high hip or the high spot, but ultimately how do I then generate as much ease into the system? Talk about ease. when you start to look at tensegrity, and then what that extrapolates into, a lot of times they, in the book by Graham Scarr on biotensegrity, talks about the icosahedron as being one of the most efficient structures in life because it's closest to the sphere. And the sphere-like structure of icosahedron makes it more efficient when you talk about, I mean, you actually look at the depths of a cell and cellular development, you start to see a lot of spherical things. Now, it then extrapolates to everything in nature will always choose efficiency. Right? So, analogy, you have a stream. Right? That stream, that water coming from wherever it is on the mountain is going to go down that mountain as efficient as possible. But you can, put that into anything. Anything in nature is always going to choose to be as efficient as possible. Can we agree there? Mm-hmm. And again, if you have something that comes up like that challenges that, I'd love to hear it because I'd like to have challenged ideas on it. But from when I've done deep introspect, that's what I've also found to be true. Now, we often are taught in school that we have, when we have such and such subluxation or misalignment, that we have this concept that we have to go against the subluxation, right? And it must be tough to make that adjustment. Because it's stuck this way, so we have to force it back to where it needs to go. What I have found, and I think many people have started to find from doing this work, is that even when you find a distortion that has an entry point, we'll talk about entry points in a minute, but even when you find a distortion that has an entry point, once you start to connect to it, you should be pulled in and find ease into making the adjustment. And so why is that? Because the universe and nature prefers efficiency. You are part of that, right? So consider yourself a tool of the universe, which you are. Right? We are all our individual components, but we're all related to the whole because us, ourself, is part of the tensegrity, the tensegrity of the entire cosmos, right? That we are an individual thing, but even we move in relationship to everything else. Wouldn't nature prefer you to be as efficient as possible? Mm-hmm. So, if you have such and such interference to your system, wouldn't nature be constantly moving and working to help clear that? And so when you connect to that, that means now when I find distortion and I go to do an adjustment, how do I know if it's clockwise or counterclockwise torque? How do I know how much lateral to medial sync that I want? How much P to A? How much pressure in one hand? What you're looking for is the continual allowing, which goes against, again, a lot of what gets taught in this mechanistic chiropractic boom. Right? Because you're like, this is this way. I'm going to sit up here and pa! Versus, I notice what I notice, and now, how can I connect with the entire system? So that when you're actually starting to set up or do an adjustment, you have an awareness of what Sue Brown would call the biogeometric integration. And so when you break down that, what Sue Brown did that was genius was gave people a roadmap to understanding biotensegrity. So you said, well, if you just imagine that there's these triangles and they flip over on each other, not only do they flip over on each other, but they're actually tetrahedrons. And not only actually tetrahedrons, they're star tetrahedrons. Once you get out there. But what you realize, at least it gives you a way to look at the human frame and understand that everything is in relationship to something else. And even at the beginning, even if you're just doing correlates, like there was a 1 here, and a 1 here, and a 1 here, and a 1 here, and a 1 here, like, awesome. And then the bigness of the principle, again, goes back to tensegrity of realizing how everything affects everything. And so when you're connecting to that distortion, can you have an awareness of what's going on underneath your hand and its relationship, because nothing operates in isolation, and its relationship to the rest of the frame. And what I've found from personal experience is that when you deliver an adjustment that accounts for the entire being, and again, we could talk about skeletal frame, but it's not just about the skeleton. Because if you actually study tensegrity, and there's a great article that Dr. Lance often references in the Kairos Training Camp Level 1, which is Donald Ingber's The Architecture of Life. It was in Scientific America in 1999, where he talks about mechanotransduction. the bigness about mechanical transduction, which again, why are we not teaching this shit in chiropractic school, is crazy to me, because you'll learn about chemical processes that stimulate cells and cause them to differentiate, but what about mechanical impulses? And that's the work that Donald Ingber did, right? And then again, just look up mechanical transduction and your mind will start going, holy shit, this is big. Why? Because mechanical forces can affect the behavior of the cell. Too much compression equals cellular death. Why? It makes sense. If the cell feels like too many cells around it are compressing inward, then it doesn't need to be there. And so it'll actually create apoptosis, which is cellular death. Now, again, if there's too much space or tension, then it will replicate itself. If you have the ideal tension state, which is, you got the proper proportioning of compression and tension, then you can get cell differentiation. Now, here's the beautiful thing about the ideal tension state. I believe this is what we're all going for, and this relates back to Biotensegrity. Dr. Coleman, hey. I love you. Thank you for showing up.
Yeah, my pleasure.
So, there are certain movements. What I've realized is that all 4 strategies of health, which is movement, nourishment, recuperation, and what I'm calling mindfulness, but you could also call positive mental attitude, that all of them have to do with presence. All of them. When I am properly nourished, and I like nourish better than nutrition, when I'm properly nourished, both body, mind, and soul, it allows me to be more present. If I have stomach discomfort and GERD and irritable bowel and all of these things because I'm not eating the right foods, I'm distracted, right? Versus when I'm feeling fueled and energized or just able to be present, I'm present. Same thing with movement, right? Say I go to the gym and I only do compressive activities, which it looks like strength activities, right? So just lifting heavy weights. Over time, those people look uncomfortable, don't they? They walk around and it's just too much compression in the system. But the same is also true if you only do flexible activities and you only get into yoga and don't know how to strengthen in certain positions within yoga, right? Too much mobility, too much flexibility. So you're looking for the balance of tension and compression. Why? Because when I can learn to take compression out of my joints and strengthen in the ideal tension state, I feel less of this, so I can be more present with this. Same thing with mental discipline. Same thing with recuperation. If you're tired, all you think about is being tired. So, everything leading back to presence. Let's talk about subluxation. And Dr. Coleman, I love you. You might disagree with me.
That's okay.
But I'm glad you're here. When it comes to biotensegrity, we realize that everything moves in relationship to everything else. To me, it's important then to understand that subluxation is not a local phenomenon, right? And I think we have always had the understanding that yes, it affects the nerve system, right? So they understand that if there's a subluxation, misalignment, causing interference to the communication of the mental impulse, then it has to affect something. Now, when it first started, it was more of the metric system, meaning that if it was a T5, then that might actually affect diaphragm. And if it was a C2, then that might have been sinuses and eyes. And if it was, L1, L2, then you're talking about the intestines. So it was very this vertebra, this organ, right? And I do think that we've come further along the spectrum with understanding that disafferentation is basically disafferentation, right? That if you're not getting proper signaling to the brain due to disruption, then that affects the entire system, its ability to have homeodynamics within the nerve system. It's a great word. That was a good little... Now, the bigger thing here is to understand that when you have what you could call local phenomenon, it's not a local phenomenon, it's a global phenomenon, and that nothing, and BJ would even say it in 1923 when he released the Subluxation specific, that everything below atlas, and I would even say atlas as well, cannot move on its own due to interosseous locks, right? So those strong facet joints, if there's a movement, there has to be movement of the vertebra below and the vertebra above. And I guess if you're moving the vertebra below and you're moving the vertebra below, then everything moves. So when somebody comes in and you've identified that you want to adjust right PI, and then you make your adjustment, one, you affected everything else in the chain, but know that that joint is not going subluxated, not subluxated. Subluxated, not subluxated. I'm in alignment. What ultimately is happening is, again, the actual adjustive force, how much change do you get in the joint? I mean, it's millimeters, right? However, that affects the rest of the system. And so ultimately, when we talk about tensegrity and understanding how everything relates to everything, instead of thinking about what is, this maximal apex of where I want to make the entrance based on misalignment, it starts to look more, and this is where I start to agree more with the tonal model, at least from philosophy of understanding analysis, that instead of thinking apex of misalignment, I'm thinking, where is my best entry point? Because is this about the bone, or is this about the nerve system? Because if this is about the nerve system, the number one quality we want of the nerve system is to be dynamic, adapting, and integrating. If those things are not happening within the nerve system, I call it DANES. Everybody's talking about gains? I'm talking about DANES. Dynamic, adapting, integrating nerve system. DANES. Now you won't forget it. If somebody comes in, and this is where I disagree with certain osseous approaches in regards to analysis, and in regards to x-ray points. Somebody comes in, and I've identified and done all my procedures to identify a PIEX. And I make that adjustment. And then they come in next time, and it's a PIEX. And they come in next time, and it's a PIEX. And I followed that. What Tulsky said, and I thought this was revolutionary, Dr. Marvin, he spoke at the Orphan Convention just 2 weeks ago. He said, chiropractors have been historically great at helping people get out of a stuck pattern and move into another stuck pattern.
I remember him saying that.
And I thought about it because it hit me. And I started looking at everybody that I had adjusted a similar way in my own practice. And the question is if they come in and you're adjusting the same things, is that nerve system adapting and integrating, and is it dynamic? So his rule or principle that he set out is I never adjust the same person the same way 3 times in a row. Now, does that mean that you could still be adjusting similar subluxations? Potentially, right? So they have a right PIX, but they also have a ASR Atlas, and they also have a T8 PLI. And so one day they come in, I adjust the T8 PLI. And then the next day they come in, I still want to adjust the T8 PLI, but now I do it anterior dorsal. Or I do it sitting, or I do it into the knees, I do it a different way. Like, how can we work with our people for continual evolution? That's another word that I don't understand within chiropractic is maintenance. What are you maintaining? Is there a peak that I'm going to reach, ever, that I say, I've gone as far as I can go?
Life's too dynamic for that.
I agree. That peak is constantly moving, right, based on our biology. But I guarantee you right now, and that's why I love Sid when he said near perfect, never perfect, because the right fruit rots, is that peak of optimal expression may never be reached. But the exciting thing is that we keep pushing forward. Right? That's what makes life fun. That's what gives life energy. So I don't want to maintain anything. Which comes into another point of clear versus non-clear. And so again, this is, you could say it's a tonal approach-ish, and not really. that there are certain techniques that exist within chiropractic that when somebody comes in, it's like your holding is a good thing, right? But again, what is determining the holding pattern, and what's the depths of the work that you can do? So if you're talking about just pure thermography, then there's people that would do that as a measurement and say, person's holding straight line or adapting line or whatever it is. Now, is the nerve system solely based on thermography and heat? There's also something that's called heart rate variability, which is actually, I think, a more dynamic, better measure of a person's adaptability, and that's what we're talking about. Is this person adapting? But again, how many functions of the body is the nerve system responsible for? So how can you say person's clear? Because this is another point. Clear is on a spectrum. Holding would be on a spectrum. And that's what we forget. So if somebody comes in and one of my techniques of measurement is thermography, does that mean that person will not benefit from receiving something that I may offer to help them become more dynamic, adapting, and integrating? What I found, especially when stepping into Sue Brown's world or Donnie Epstein's world or even Tolsky's world, is that there are layers to this. One of the most basic fundamental layers may be the biodynamics of the spine and extremities. But then you go deeper in understanding the hemodynamics of the disc. And then you go deeper and you realize the expression and undulation of the spinal cord and the pump between cranium and sacrum. And then you go deeper and realize, oh shit, my intention can go all the way to the cell. Are you telling me that person's cellularly clear? Hormonally clear? But you say, I adjust the spine. Sure, you adjust the spine, but what level and what lens are you looking at the spine? Because the spine is a lever. And ultimately, the spine, if you want to talk about biotensegrity, the spine is a lever for consciousness. That's what Dee was tapping into. Why did certain chiropractors get miraculous results? Intention. When you keep it at the level of the bone, you're going to see bone results. When you understand that when you connect with somebody authentically and dynamically, that anything is possible because they are part of the universal consciousness and the consciousness is part of them, that's when you start seeing miracles happen. So how clear are they? I will also make this suggestion. I believe you can only get people as clear as you are. And I'm not talking about subluxation patterns. But that's a piece of it. Like I said, I think that's the fundamental piece of it. So that's where it comes down to the self-work. Why should I train? What are you training for? You want to help somebody be present? Are you present? You want to help somebody be love and express love? Are you love and expressing love? You want to help somebody release their traumas through a specific chiropractic adjustment? How clear are you? The clearer this vessel is, when it shows up, it can do God's work. But if it's having to filtrate through bullshit that you haven't worked through, then it ain't going to be clear. So you want your adjustment to carry this laser-like, precise energy into the opening of somebody's soul. And what does that look like? But that is tensegrity magnified. You can talk about tensegrity structures, again, relating to the skeletal system, to the myofascial system. But ultimately, it goes as deep as the cell. And if it goes as deep as the cell, it goes as deep as consciousness itself. It goes into the intelligence, to life. This profession was built about life. These aren't chiropractic principles. These are life principles. And we forgot about that. We got more involved in the science of the evidence. And yes, but there's science in the evidence for consciousness as well. So how does this profession, and I don't know where this came from right now, but I'm going to stay in it. how does this profession go to the next level? It's not by putting where we came from in a corner, saying those are our quack roots. Those quack roots got results. And what was it? It was a vivid imagination. That was part of it too. You look at Neville Goddard's work, he says imagination is God. When these people came through and they were learning from Didi, because again, when you first learned from Didi, it was just until you got the big idea. It could have been 1 week, could have been 2 weeks, and then it was 6 weeks. 6 weeks was long back then. But what did you need? What was the big idea? That there is a universal intelligence in all things, and that if you can properly connect to it and deliver the right adjustment at the right time with that special something, presence, then people will heal. So, anybody have any questions?
I have a question around resiliency. You talked about maintenance care and adaptation, and I wonder how, when we're working towards our potential, or there's also like ebbs and flows of how we show up, and so I was curious about how resiliency would fit into that. Excuse me.
I don't quite understand the question.
Yeah, got it. Dang it, but like, so we're trying to be adaptable, and yet at the same time there's experiences in our life that are gonna cause us to have impact on ourselves, impact on our families and whatnot. And so when I think of maintenance, what are we trying to maintain? It's also adaptability, but resiliency. So when we hit those lows, we have the spring to find our way again.
Sure.
And so oftentimes I think about when we're measuring and we're doing something, we're not necessarily, I feel like adaptability doesn't really capture the essence of resiliency. And how...
Yeah, and I've used those interchangeably as well.
Excuse me.
I understand the question more now. In the green books they would call it survivability, I believe. It was like the internal survivability and adaptability. But yeah, the resilience. I've used like resilience factor and adaptability factor somewhat interchangeably. And you could say that an internal resistance, because again, like we don't get sick because of germs, bacteria, and viruses, but we don't have the internal resistance or internal adaptability to adapt to either internal or external environments. And so I see what you're saying. To me, like adaptability is a little bit more dynamic, and resilience can be seen as a little bit more stagnant or not as dynamic. But I think they both are, because I think your resilience factor, and when I think about resilience, again, I think about the ability to maintain, right, a current level of expression based on what is happening. So either, again, internally or externally, which can be transferred to the concept of adaptability. Am I able to adapt and maintain a certain level of expression of health? However, what you'll find is that you can be training your resilience and training your adaptability to reach new levels so that you can take more stress, right? And so I don't want to maintain my level of adaptability, right? So I want to always be training some element, whether it's an element of mindfulness and presence and patience, so that I don't. What I found actually, I think this is big, is that the bulk of training is finding out how to, you could say, keep that ideal tension state or the homeodynamics of your nerve system in stressful environments. Like that's mastery to me. Like and that's what Wim Hof in the cold water immersion. The natural feeling is I just enter a sympathetic environment, I should start shivering. But again, the master can hit the cold water, 45 degrees or below, and nothing changes. That's training your nervous system to be more adaptable. But that happens in so many different situations. I was in class, and the teacher made a remark that made me feel stupid, and all of a sudden now I feel internally upset, and I regretted what I was saying, and now I'm getting anxious about future asking questions. Or I then trained that, realized that I had a charge from that, and I realized whatever he said is not about me, or she said is not about me, and I'm building resilience towards everyday life stresses. And not just everyday life stresses, what you'll find is as you grow in this, as you build more resilience and you build more adaptability, you don't even have to put bigger stresses on you. The universe will bring them to you. Right? The universe will love to give you challenges because you got a little stronger. Like, oh, you think you're strong? Yeah. Here you go. Try this one out. And so that's a sign. So how do you know if you're growing or being stagnant? If you're being stagnant, you're getting the same challenges, which is actually a sign of sickness. Because how do you know if you're experiencing symptoms of dis-ease or of health? Symptoms of dis-ease are pattern. They're cyclical. Symptoms of healing and health often are new and changing. So it's the same thing with your growth as an individual. If you're not growing, I imagine you're getting a lot of the similar problems and challenges. So you say, how can I get new challenges today? You're growing. I love it. Thank you for stopping in.
Yeah, thanks.
Where are you headed?
Guest speaking today.
You are?
In ethics.
Okay.
Yeah.
I might come by.
If you got a chance to drop, I don't know what room I'm in, but from 1 to like 2:30.
I'd love to catch up with you after this.
That would be great.
All right.
All right. See you guys.
Helpful? Cool. Anybody else?
What about the people who come in who don't seem to want that? Do you then feel
Don't want what?
growth? They want to stay at their level.
Oh, yeah.
So at that point, are you evolving to where you are starting to refer them somewhere else, or are you finding that they're following you?
I find that you attract whoever is needing to see you. And that you don't have to change anybody. And I don't need anybody to step into anything. And that's big, because we talked about this a lot at the convention as well, about holding space and what does that mean. Holding space, and this is the same in practice as it is for parenting for me, is that when somebody enters the practice, that I don't need them to be anything different than they are. But ultimately, by showing up and being who you are, and connecting in the way that you connect, you're offering an opportunity. Now, whether they step in or step out does not matter, because you have no attachment. Right? I have no attachments even if people get well. Zero. It's crazy. However, I do expect them to get well. Now, it's interesting because even in lasting purpose, they said without expectation, but to me, expectation is the intention. So I actually do have great expectations and great intentions, but no attachment to whether anything happens. It's always learning.
What does that look like? Difference between learning and attachment?
Attachment means that I'm emotionally distressed by a result.
Oh, okay.
Learning says, that happened, how do I get better?
That's interesting.
Right?
Do you have any tips on your personal experience and trying to learn how to get rid of that attachment? Or cope with it?
Yeah, I think it's a great question. How do you train that? Ultimately, every single person is responsible for their own experience. A great book for that is The Way of Mastery. And it was published by the Shanti Christo Foundation, which actually it's a channeling of Jesus Christ. Which I didn't know. There's a bunch of books that have supposedly been channeled by Jesus, channeled Jesus Christ to do the writing. Yes, The Way of Mastery, the whole first chapter is about how everything that you are experiencing, both internally and externally, is because of you. The first chapter, I was like, boom, 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 yes! So, I think I highlighted the whole, 30 pages.
It's really getting into, the holographic.
Yeah. And so it's the same thing. Somebody comes in, their experience ultimately is a reflection of both their internal. Their results are often based on them. So you find the more committed they are to the care, the more open they are to the care, the more they're on time to their appointments. Like, you'll see it time and time again. It's the people that only have just a little foot in, that are just trying chiropractic, that often don't do well, right? But what you'll start to do is, like, when you start to operate again from a place of knowingness, it changes the game. So what in your practice then determines of whether somebody's putting a toe in or somebody's all in? It's you. Right? So again, they are a reflection of you. So when your practice is struggling, you're struggling. When your practice is distracted, you're distracted. And so when people come in, and you can stand in that full knowingness. By the way, there's 3 ways to KNOW: education, experience, and faith. And that's why I have nothing against, I have no charge for the people that want to go evidence-based route. Because that's how they get to a state of knowingness. That's not me. I've always learned more, felt more, known more through experience. So meaning that if I've actually delivered something or seen it with my own eyes or felt it, that I have way more presence of knowing. So then when they step in, they say, hey, can you help me? And the way you communicate, and it's a vibration. It's not the words that you are saying, by the way. It's the feeling, just as laws of attention, laws of manifestation. It's the feeling, and it's the vibration. Do you vibrate confidence that you know that you know that you know? And if you don't yet, how do you get there? And I would suggest that you can get there quicker if you train. Expose yourself to people that are getting the results that you want to get. Or, if it doesn't exist out there, you continue to live in the imagination, because imagination is God. And if you can see it, and you can image it, then you can create it. If there's anything I've been a testament for, it's creating an imagination. I've created a lot of things that people didn't think of or existed. And I've heard a lot of people talk shit about the things I was going to create. And then I created them anyway. And that's not, hey, look at me. I'm just trying to give you some light that if you can image it and you're willing to train for it, then you can see it manifest. And that's in health, that's in healing, that's in success, that's in business, that's in relationship, that's in life, that it's all a reflection of you. And so when you learn that it's all a reflection of you, there's no attachment. It's just, how can I then get better? I missed the mark this time. I don't feel anything towards it, but I'm going to get better. And if I do feel anything towards it, because I don't want you to be anti-emotion. Another sign of mastery is being able to feel what you feel and then come back to neutral. Right? So I get charged if somebody said something. I feel what I feel. I notice it. I'm not going to ignore it. But if I stay there, that's a sign of sickness. The molecules of emotion. How long does that actual process take about? It's about 90 seconds. That process where the hormones change and you start going through, the feeling creates the hormone creates the feeling, and it goes through the cycle. But ultimately, it should be able to exit and enter. What's your strategies for helping it exit if it's not exited? Animals have great strategies, don't they? They know how to shake that shit out. Figure it out. Move on. They're present, right? They're not thinking about something some coworker said 2 years ago. It's like, hey, Aunt, we had a job to do. I wanted you to carry this leaf with me, and you tried to take a lunch break. And not only did you take a lunch break, you called me a fat ass. And now here we are. I don't know if Aunt left for 2 years, but here we are, 2 years later, and I'm still thinking about that time you took a break. No! Animals don't, at least I don't think they do. I mean, I haven't been in the consciousness of an ant, but I don't think they do. You watch the ant movie, you're like, yeah, they do.
They remember.
They remember everything.
They do.
Anybody else got any other questions?
So how do you separate something that's a challenge to overcome versus an obstacle to avoid kind of thing, like in your own personal growth?
Boom. Great question. I'm going to give you a resource. I do think there was an interview. Ty Lopez and Tom Bilyeu. It's Bilyeu, Tom, right? Ty Lopez and Tim Bilyeu? Bilyeu. Impact Theory. Look up Ty Lopez Impact Theory. He goes into mentorship. You know what he goes into also is a lot of people are willing to do the work, and like there's like in entrepreneurship there's this grind, hard work. He said if your compass is off though, for instance, you know, how many thousands of miles around the earth, and if you're not pointed in north, right? And so maybe you only had to go 1 mile, but you were pointed in south, right? Because you didn't have the right insight. You just walked how many thousands of miles in the wrong direction. You still did, you know, you had your hard work mentality, but you went way further than you had to. Like, I have my own example for this. My dumb ass. We had, when we moved into the building that I'm now at in the Laurel District in Oakland, I discovered there was 3 layers of carpet. The top layer was disgusting already, right? And so I was like, there's no way I'm opening, like, with this top, you know, like, it's like one, I'm like, that's a health hazard, I believe. Like, there's probably mold in between the layers. And anyway, so I ripped out the carpet, and that was somewhat efficient. Then what I realized that I wanted to do is stain because now the cement looked like shit and there's old like glue marks and all this stuff. And so I go to Home Depot and I bought like this chemical stuff that you pour down, and then I bought like this like hand sanders, and I go in, I'm wearing full chemical mask, I'm wearing goggles and a full suit, on my hands and knees scrubbing this cement floor no joke, I did it 18 hours and I covered maybe 100 square feet. And I was doing this because I was still working my other job, I still had my other practice, and so I could only do this work at night. So I'd get off my practice, I'd go over to this other practice, we're trying to get ready to transition, and from 8 p.m. to 4 a.m. I'm on my hands and knees with chemical scrubbing. Then my father-in-law shows up. He goes, you know you can just buy like an automatic buffer? I said, what? He said, you could probably just take an automatic buffer and buff all this out. He said, you can rent one. It's like $50. We go to the rental place. We did it in an hour. Now I know. But I do want to give you this. So I gave you a resource, but I also want to give you this. How do I know if the obstacles and challenges in my life are showing up because they're showing up to help me grow so I can step into who I'm supposed to be, or they're showing up because I'm out of integrity and it's putting obstacles in my path to get me to go the direction that I need to be going? That's a difference. And so what happens is that's when you have to connect to something bigger than yourself, that universal consciousness in our soul, and ask that question. So for those of you that haven't asked cellular questions, I encourage you to. We all have an internal mechanism, and sometimes it's sound and sometimes it's feel, kinesthetic. I'm a little bit more kinesthetic, and also sight, or images. And so when you start to ask that question, again, the basic question is like, soul, or whatever you want to call it, am I receiving this challenge because I'm needing this in my life to grow? Are you putting this challenge in here because I need to do some soul searching to find out how I'm going to be more connected to my purpose by doing something else? And that might be a hard answer for some of us to hear. Because I think a lot of times we're going in the wrong direction. And I can say this with clarity. Not everybody was designed to be a chiropractor. And sometimes we're experiencing what we're experiencing in the chiropractic realm because it's not for us. It was part of our path, potentially, but we're not supposed to stay there. And so ask those questions. Ask those questions about all of your expressions. What I'll tell you is, it's not the work that causes burnout. It's the resistance. So, if universe and nature always prefers efficiency, when you start to get in your path, you'll find a groove. And you might be doing more work, but you're just as passionate and just as alive and have more energy than ever. Because it's slingshotting you into where you need to be. So find those grooves. Like for me in school, one of the ways I did that was when I got passionate. So if I said something along the way today that spiked your interest, whether it's biotensegrity or some other facet of what I talked about, and you have a deep burning desire to know, I can guarantee you are going to learn way more about that when you're passionate about it and you feel aligned with your purpose about it than when you're trying to learn about it just because you think you should. So I would crush through books, like 5 books in a week, just because I was passionate about it. I had to read the next page. I figured out the game of chiropractic school. I could pass your test, but I'm going to learn what I need to know to be the best chiropractor I can be. You good? Thank you guys. Thanks for having me.